Hi everyone, welcome to the video. I'm writing a short story. I'll try and make this as quick as I can. This is for people who want to revise a bit more or have missed sessions. Okay, so for the short story then, it's out of 40. You need to get about 18 at the minimum to get a grade 4. People who have got grade 3s at school normally get around 10 to 14 out of 40. So yeah, this is the one where we can gain a few extra marks and hopefully at least get you to the 18 out of 40 mark. So with the EDUQAS exam, what happens is you get 4 random titles, in this case, Making a Difference, The Choice, Write About a Time You're at a Children's Party, Write a Story that begins with I didn't know if I had the courage to do this, and you have to pick the one that you like the most, then write a story about it. Normally you get 2 general ones like A and B, and then you get 2 that are a bit more specific like C and D. The idea is though that you're going to go into the exam knowing at least 1 or 2 ideas, or have done 1 or 2 drafts, and all you do is you pick the title that is closest to it. So for the short story, the word count is 450 to 600 words, so that's about 2.5 to 3 pages. Obviously if you're doing your exam on the computer, you've got the word count there. And you've got 45 minutes to write a short story. If you have 25% extra time, then you have an hour. So from the examiner, these are quotes from the examiner. The examiner says anything less than 450 is unlikely to score a high mark. Any work longer than 600 or 3 pages is more likely to have mistakes. So they say to go between 2 and 2.5 pages. So like I said, we're going to go into the exam with at least 1 idea, and all you're going to do is pick the title that is closest to one of them. Again, the head examiner is telling us realistic stories will get you a higher grade, so my advice is to do a story that has happened to you or happened to a friend, and all you're doing then is basically describing what has happened to you, and it will be a lot easier to write. So in my lessons, I always go through the problems that grade 3 students tend to have, and the idea is that we do not do them. So what did the grade 3 students do wrong in the story? Well, generally they're too short. I know it's a short story, but anything less than 1.5 pages is not going to get anything of merit. There is no planning. So at the top of your answer sheet, I would do a very short, simple plan, 3 bullet points, beginning, middle and end of your story. It's good for you to look at, but it also shows the examiner where you are going to go with the story if you don't finish. Struggles with basic accuracy, and we'll talk about that later in the video. And like I said, realistic stories will get you a higher grade. What we don't want your story to look like is this, okay? We don't want it to look like a script. She said, he replied, she replied, he shouted, he whispered. We don't want it to look like a script, okay? We're not writing a play. So what I would say in your story, if you want to use dialogue, you don't have to, but if you want to use dialogue, this is my example. I've got probably 4 or 5 pieces of dialogue. So just a few times people are speaking. So I've told you the grade 3 mistakes. So the question is now, well, what are we going to do about it? So this is I think there's 10 on here. These are my plan. It'd be good for you to write down if you're taking notes. So all of these I'll go through. So do a plan. You can have 1 setting or 1 or 2 locations, no more than 2 locations in your story. I want you to set your story over a few minutes. Write it in the past tense. There's your word count. Try to make it personal and realistic. You need a clear beginning and end. A classic grade 3 mistake is you run out of time and don't do an ending, or you rush an ending. You're going to have an interesting opening and closing line. You're going to show, not tell, which I will talk about later, and a maximum 2 characters. I would probably do it on 1 character. You've only got 45 minutes, you've only got 2 pages. It's going to be hard to write more than 2 characters. Okay, so all of these are tips. You don't have to do them. This is just my tip. I would write in the first person because I think it's nice and simple. But remember, I doesn't have to mean you. So if you are a 16-year-old girl in Bournemouth, you can do your story about a 65-year-old Indian man if you want to be, and still use I. My point is, I doesn't have to be literally you, but if you were asking me the question, is it easier to write as you, then I would probably say yes. So when does your story take place? We're going to do it in the past. Just again, it is easier from a SPAG point of view. If people tend to do it in the present, they tend to flip between the past and present tense, and that will get you marked down. So if you write your story as if it happened yesterday, I think that will be beneficial to you. So yeah, set your story in the past. For example, you're using the past tense, like I've got the examples here. A massive tip I would give you, and I really would do this, is set your story over a short period of time. I would almost do my story over 10 minutes, okay? Or maybe a day, but generally not longer. I would do it maybe over 10 minutes or an hour. Don't set your story over days, weeks, months, or years. Again, you've only got 2 pages, you've only got 45 minutes, you won't have time to write too much. And here are the stories that I would avoid. Again, your story should really just be a small little moment, a humorous little moment of something that has happened to you. Don't do anything too serious, and please, in red on this part of the video, do not do a dream ending. You'll get mad, you'll get marked down for it, because it just shows that you don't know how to end it, or you've been in a rush. Okay, so people say, well, it's fair enough you saying too low word count, but how do I stop not having a low word count? Okay, I would say, have I got that on there? Where have I gone? Have I gone wrong? Okay, I'll talk about it. Yeah, so if this was on the computer, this would be about 1 page of writing. Okay, people do 1 page for the story quite a lot, and the reason is you do your reading exam for an hour before the story. You probably spend, instead of spending an hour on the reading exam, you spend an hour and 20 on the reading exam, and then you only give yourself 25 minutes to do the story, and because of that, you only do a page. Here was the marking, the examiner marking on that 1 page. It says thin, brief, limited. All of these mean it's far too short. And because of this student got 6 out of 40. If you think about that, you need 18 out of 40 for a grade 4. It really is missing it a lot. If you look at the story, it isn't actually that bad. So basically, if this would have been 2 pages or 2.5 pages, it probably would have gone up to 18. So part of the thing you've got to get into your head is a lot of it is about word count. So like I said, this story wasn't that bad. If it had been 2 or 2.5 pages, they would have got the grade 4. So you've got to make sure you at least get to 2 pages. So how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to plan the story beforehand, and then in the days leading up to the exam, you're going to write a draft of your story, and I'll mark it for you if you want to send it to me. This is my students. And if you want to, you could start with the short story in the exam. You don't have to start with the reading. If you want to get your short story out of the way, then do so. Okay, so your plan is basically going to be beginning, middle, and end. And remember, your plot and your story should be small, interesting, and not too serious. So just a little event, a little thing that happened. So for example, one of my students this week did a story about her friends were on like a boat in the summer. They all jumped into the water. She was a bit scared about it. She ended up being so scared that she, instead of jumping in the water, she jumped and ended up falling on the boat. Okay, so it's not like an amazing story, but it's just a small little story that she can describe in 2 pages. It's fun, it's interesting, and it might surprise the examiner. Okay, you need to decide on your ending before starting your writing. If you don't decide on your ending, your story will go all over the place. So make sure you do a beginning, middle, and end. Okay, so all stories tend to have the same structure, which is this: introduce the character, introduce a problem, solve the problem. So if it was James Bond, for example, it would be you meet James Bond, someone tries to take over the world, and then James Bond stops them. Same with Titanic, a little bit, slightly different. We introduce the characters, the ship hits the iceberg, and then we find out what happens to the characters. The Party, which is the one I've been looking at in my lessons, is basically a story about, if I go to the plan first, the story is about a girl gets ready for a fancy dress party. She arrives and it's not fancy dress, and then she decides to stay because she likes being the centre of attention. That is a good plan. It's not an amazing, complicated story. It's just a nice little thing of like, she was going for a party, fancy dress, she turns up, it's a bit embarrassing, but then she decides to stay. That is an example of a good plan. It's nice and clear, beginning, middle, and end. This is an example of what people tend to do in the exam. Girls get ready for party, her friend calls, she's an hour late, blah, 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 blah. This might make a good novel if you had 30 minutes or 3 hours to write, but you've only got 45 minutes to write. So just do something nice and simple. One thing happens in your story. Don't do a story where it says, and this happened, and then this happened, and so on. Okay, so again, if I was doing that one about the party, I could pick C, I could probably pick D because of the fancy dress, I could do B because it might be, well, is the girl going to stay because she's in fancy dress? The thing to remember on the day of the exam is don't panic if a title doesn't fit exactly, just be a bit clever and fit it into your opening paragraph. So here's the story. I'm going to read this through. Notice how it's got the plan at the top. I'm going to read this through, and if you've got any problems, this is available on Teams. Okay, and if anyone who's watching this on YouTube wants it, I can set it up somewhere for you to get. The present. Why do these things always happen to me? I've always been that girl, the one who bumps into the furniture or spills their drink over a boy I fancy. I've been looking forward to it for months. It was my chance to be the cool girl for once. It was going to be the party of the year. I'd spent hours getting ready. I've always loved the party, but a bit beforehand is just too great. I blasted out We Found Love through the speakers, danced around, and watched myself in the mirror as I sang way better than Rihanna into my hairbrush. I spent a lifetime cleansing, exfoliating and moisturising, plucking and polishing, along with all the other things my dad rolls his eyes at when I talk about. I smiled at the reflection as I played with my bunny tail and drew on my whiskers. It was Katie's idea to go as a rabbit. So notice, they haven't said we are going to a fancy dress party. She's just given us clues through the bunny tail and drew on my whiskers that it is a fancy dress party. Remember, show not tell. Don't tell me something is sewing. Give me hints. Show me. Do you know the hardest part of my prettifying procedure? It was somehow doing my makeup as a Playboy bunny and making sure my fake tan didn't make me look like a huge carrot. I just about pulled it off. As I arrived in my taxi, I skipped down the driveway and took in the mansion before me. The lawn was like Buckingham Palace and I felt like a princess. Well, a rabbit princess if that exists. As my door was opened, I hopped in and looked at the lush hallway. My heart sank. I stood under the hot glares of each and every person around me, not knowing if I should laugh or cry. There was no Peter Pans, pirates or princesses in sight. I was the only one in fancy dress. All I could hear was whispering and sniggering. I think someone even oinked. Didn't you get the message? A girl I didn't know hissed. It's not fancy dress. No, I didn't, I replied as I was panning the room trying to find something to hit her with. Only joking. I'm a nice rabbit after all. I looked down at myself. In the split second, I looked at my reflection in my whiskers in the reflection of the stained glass windows and grinned. I pushed up my white plush bunny tail I'd stitched onto the back of my dress. I strode to the dance floor with an ocean of eyeballs following me. The sniggering turned to smiling and clapping as I strutted in my bunny costume. As I started to dance, the song changed. I whooped as Rihanna's We Found Love screamed through the speakers. As the song went on, I heard the front door slam shut and a little scream from a voice I recognised. As the figure trudged towards me, I could see a pair of rabbit ears bobbing along the crowd. This is so embarrassing, Katie groaned. What are you talking about? I smiled, clearly taking Katie by surprise. I think we look fantastic. Quickly, the first night ever turned into the best scene. Best one. I smiled as I thought to myself, why do these things always happen to me? Okay, there you go. So it's a nice little story. It begins and ends with the same line, which is a really clever device that students use and would impress the examiner. Notice how she's not used a lot of adverbs. So she's not said like I said grumpily. She's used stronger verbs. So instead of saying this is so embarrassing, Katie said miserably, we've used groaned. Yeah, remember, it's show not tell. What are you talking about towards the end? She hasn't put I was happy, she's put I smiled. So she's not telling me she's happy, she's showing me physically with a smile. So write in a memorable opening line. So 98% of books are sold on the strength of the first two sentences. So you've got to make sure that you grab the reader's attention with the first sentence. The one in our story was a rhetorical question, and it was why did these things always happen to me? So that is a really good technique to use. The other technique to use is just do an interesting statement. So for example, this was the worst day of my life. Both of these devices grab the reader's attention, so I would advise doing one of them. One thing that will really make the examiner fall in love with your story is, like I just said earlier, making sure, well not making sure, but if it fits, try and use the same opening and closing line. Again, only if it fits. If it doesn't fit, don't use it because you don't want to look silly. But it's a really clever device that makes your writing quite circular and is quite a clever device. Okay, memorable opening paragraph, quite similar to the opening line really. Try and hook the reader, get the reader thinking, go straight into the action. Don't waffle about what the person is wearing or what the room looks like. We don't need 5 lines on what people are wearing. We don't need 5 lines on what the weather is like. So going back to the story about the girl, if you look at the first 2 paragraphs, let's look at the technique she uses. Okay, so for example, show don't tell. She's not just telling me she's going to a fancy dress party, she's giving me hints. Bunny tail and drew my whiskers. She's not said I am excited to go. She is blasting, she's singing into a hairbrush. We can tell she is excited to go. Okay. Sensory language, okay, that's really good to do in the first paragraph because it makes you feel like the reader is there. So we can all imagine what a teenage girl singing to We Found Love with Rihanna is probably like. So there's sensory language, what we can hear. A feeling for sensory language, touch, plucking, moisturising. We can imagine what the girl is doing. Writing techniques, okay, so in the red here, rhetorical question. All in the blue, we've got short sentences, plucking, polishing, we've got list, we've got a simile, which should look like a huge carrot. Okay, so short sentences, lots of devices. Again, memorable ending should pretty much mirror the opening, really. So your ending should be included in the plan. You need to know what your ending is. And again, don't say it was a dream. Again, if you can do the device where you start and end with the same sentence, that's pretty good. Remember, your ending is what the examiner will be left with. So try and make sure it's something interesting. Okay, so deciding on your stories. Okay, we're not going to do this. I'm just going to skim through this. Okay, so here's my list. These are past student ideas that my students have done in the last couple of years. I think they're all pretty good. So if you're really struggling for an idea, have a look through this list and see if any of these appeal to you. Like I say, all of these have been successful in the past. So final bit, final tips. Do a plan, write for 40 minutes, proofread for 5 minutes, create an exciting first and final sentence, use interesting sentence starters, make sure to use paragraphs, no dream endings, keep the story simple, and don't have huge sentences. Remember, if you've got a sentence that's 3 or 4 lines in your A4 without a full stop, you need to go back and put one in. Okay, thank you very much.